All right. Welcome to the exam 4 review for the strength and conditioning welcome to the exam 4 review for the strength and conditioning class at Wichita State University. So we're going to go through this. We have chapters. Let me share my screen and get that review pulled up. All right. Excellent. As we review this, again, same as the last study guides and reviews that I have talked about, go through those chapters. We are chapters 17 through 22. So we have 5 chapters to get through. Go through and read them. Learn the keywords that are bolded through, and they are in the back of each chapter for a quick reference. Know the quizzes, so do those quizzes. Do the quizzes so that you know those questions and the answers, and then do the homeworks and re-look at the homework so we can see what those questions and answers are too. Sorry, we got a lot of interruptions at the start of this. We'll go through it. Okay, starting with chapter 17, that is the program design for resistance training. So we want you first to know the expected adaptations to resistance training. So when you go into resistance training, we're lifting weights, know the percentages that you're lifting. And that's one of the other bullet points. There's the reps and intensities of the weight lifted. And so that guide, we looked at that when we did our 5 rep max testing, but 12 reps is 70%, 10 reps is closer to 75%. You've got 80% for 8 reps. That's an easy one to remember, 80 for 8. But obviously 1 rep would be 100%. So knowing that roughly, that guide to intensity and how many reps that you should be able to achieve at that certain intensity. Know the goal. If you are doing lower rep range, then your goal is closer to strength and power. If your goal is on the more of a hypertrophy, then it's going to be closer to 6 to 12 reps. And if it's endurance, greater than 12, up to 15, 20, even 25 for muscular endurance. So know what you should be achieving and the weight that should be associated with those intensities. Understand that the level of the athlete will depend on the adaptations or the results that you'll see. Someone that is new to training is going to see a lot of strength benefits early on, and they will plateau as the body learns how to create movement and learns how to fire these muscles. So we see great strength and neuro adaptations in early athletes and when you're learning, but that plateaus into more advanced, and strength won't increase so rapidly, and it plateaus off, and it takes a little bit harder programming to achieve more and consistent progression. Know the difference of neurological versus physiological changes. Again, that goes back to the rep ranges that you're choosing. We're looking at strength. We're going to be working more of the neuro adaptations and stress in the neurological system to recruit muscle fibers, versus if it's larger rep ranges, less submaximal weight, then we're going to look more at what the muscle can do and how we can provide it energy. So we're looking at the physiological changes and the amount of muscle contraction and fueling those muscle contractions. Rest intervals. So there are some charts in your textbook, but looking at those rest intervals, depending on your goals, they can be 1 to 20, 1 to 12 through 1 to 20 for that hypertrophy, for the strength and in the phosphagen system. So this is to do with energy systems on rest intervals, but it can be for endurance. Really, it's a lot. Muscular endurance is a lot less, 30 seconds. We want to minimize rest for endurance. The whole point is that you're working more. Hypertrophy is kind of in between. We want 30 seconds up to 2 minutes for rest intervals, and strength is larger, 3 minutes up to 5 minutes in between each workout. So it's to do with the phosphagen, glycolytic, or aerobic energy systems being used. When it turns terms of resistance training, it's going to be either phosphagen or glycolytic. So between 30 seconds for the muscular endurance, progressing a little longer towards the 2 minutes for hypertrophy, and then even longer for strength training. The 2 for 2 rule, be aware of that. That's if you get more than 2 reps in your last set of an exercise for 2 consecutive workouts. So set 1 I'm planning to hit 10 reps, and I hit 10 reps. Set 2, I hit 10 reps again, and I'm like, I could probably do more than this. Set 3, I hit 12. I did that pretty good. And then next week when you do it again and you do the same thing, if you can achieve that higher rep range than you actually target, then you need to be moving up weight. And that's the 2 for 2 rule. So that's resistance training. I'll check here. Doesn't look like we got any comments. So going on to chapter 18 with plyometrics. This is a big part about knowing the stretch shortening cycle. It plays into speed and agility and sprint training too. So they all use this. We've got the eccentric, the amortization, and the concentric phases of muscle contraction. When you're looking at plyometric training, it's all about how do we decelerate. So when we're coming into a movement, we decelerate and then re-accelerate into the next. So moving and changing direction. It's all about that. How can we load and decelerate as fast as possible safely, and then minimize the contact time, the amortization time for your concentric and moving to a new direction. So the lengthening of the muscle to decelerate, and then the shortening of the muscle to concentrically accelerate. Knowing those, the greater that you can have movement into a deceleration, but under a shorter time, the more you're going to create force coming out of that on the concentric action. Okay, that's why you can jump higher when you load into it, eccentrically stretch, and then concentrically contract out of that. If you can do it quickly, but also under a long range of motion, the more you dip, you can jump higher and have a stretch reflex in that muscle. Safety considerations to be thinking of with plyometric training. Of course, you are jumping around. It's harder on the joints, harder on the tendons, harder on the muscles. So you should be able to squat 1.5 times your body weight before you start doing lower body plyometrics. Okay, if you're jumping around off boxes, def jumps, you want to be able to squat at least 1.5 times your body weight, because when you jump, you're adding gravity to the weight of your body. So your body, your muscles, your knees, your ankles are going to go under more than just your body weight as you come with gravity towards the ground. Now, the ground surface is important too. Safety considerations, you want something that's going to be shock absorbing. Concrete, hard floors, not good surfaces to do this on. But in the same realm, really soft surfaces like really thick exercise pads or like mini trampolines, not great either, because they're going to increase the amortization time that we have on the stretch shortening cycle. So we want something that is shock absorbing, but also gives you a little bounce and doesn't take too long to actually have that eccentric to concentric movement. You should be cautious if you weigh over 220 pounds. The NSCA puts that number there, 220 pounds. That's going to limit what they want you to do in terms of height of box jumping. They recommend around 18 inches for people that weigh over 220. But if you're under that, they allow you to go up to 42 inches. So the height of the box can vary. You can go all the way up to 42 inches, which is about almost 4 feet. But it will depend on your weight. Knowing your progressions. So jump in place, standing jump, then goes into hops, multiple hops, bounds, box jumps, and depth jumps would be last. So knowing the progressions of how you can go from one to the next, and being able to give an example for like an exam question. You know, you maybe given one example. An athlete is jumping in place. How would we progress that? Or they're not having great success there. How would we regress that? So just knowing the progressions and regressions on that. Those 5 kind of techniques. And foot placements, that's the way we scale how much work, the volume that we're doing with plyometrics. Beginners are 80 to 100 foot placements. Intermediates are 100 to 120, and advanced 120 to 140 foot placements per workout. And that's it for the plyometrics. Again, there is some crossover here into the speed and agility chapter on chapter 19. First, we have impulse there. So knowing what impulse is. So that's basically power production. It is force under the amount of time that you can produce it. So the quicker you can produce a force, a contraction force, the more impulse, the more power you produce. And when it comes to speed, that is what we want. We want a lot of force being produced at a very quick amount of time, and that's going to get you moving. With agility, we also incorporate change of direction. We also incorporate your cognitive ability to maybe hear a stimulus. If it's a go, it's a stopwatch, it's a cue, maybe it's a shot for the start of a race. That agility component has that response to a stimulus. So there is a cognitive ability there, as well as just a physical one. But change of direction uses eccentric loading. So again, being able to load the body safely, making sure the joints work correctly, goes into that change of direction. Then we can go into the concentric phase from that position. Speed development is, there's a few pages on this in the textbook, but looking at the technique for sprint speed. So from starting position, how we're trying to emphasize the amount of force being produced more towards the front anterior side of the body, the quads, really driving forward at an angle, 45-degree going forward. And that then becoming more vertical in your stance, and it turning more from more longer stride lengths and a lower stride rate at top speed. So we are trying to progress stride rate and stride length as we run, but we see that it's a higher stride rate at the beginning, not so long at the beginning when we're accelerating. Then we get to that top speed, we stand more vertically, we're more pulling back with that hamstring, we're pouring at the ground to create that speed, and it's a lot of hamstring work. And yeah, it's shoulders are being moved. We talked about this in Parisi, if you were listening to Sheldon on how he's looking at different techniques through this speed and sprint technique there. So shoulders moving, not elbows. We're going full range of motion. Chapter 20 looks at program design for aerobic endurance athletes. So knowing the adaptations that we achieve, we went through that today, right? In our aerobic class, where we should see if we're working the aerobic energy system, we get better at it. We get better oxygen being delivered to the muscles. So that's the blood flow, the hemoglobin holding that oxygen. We get better utilization of the energy substrates in that system. So we're talking about beta oxidation, we're talking about Krebs cycle, so fat utilization for energy production, and the efficiency that we can be using and creating energy in that system. So that's going to increase. The key is to get the right intensity to have those adaptations occur. And so we scale intensity through a few different means. The most commonly used is heart rate, because it is most easily tested, either by a watch or a strap. Heart rate's quite easy to do. So that's the most commonly used, but there's also the RPE scale that we use, right? Both the 1 to 10 modified or the 6 to 20 Borg scale that we can use. You can look at VO2 as another way to look at intensity. It's a little harder to actually monitor VO2, but that can be done. And we can look at your METs, right? One metabolic equivalent is VO2 of 3.5, and so 2 METs is 7, it goes up. And how do we scale intensity? Either just what we said, a percentage of heart rate, the RPE going higher, the torque test I mentioned today as well as an option, the Carbonian formula, looking at your heart rate reserve, so max heart rate minus the resting heart rate times your intensity plus that resting heart rate again. And when do we use the aerobic training, and when is the bulk of that done? Will depend on the athlete and the sport that we're actually applying it to, but we see majority of sports are going to use the majority of aerobic training in the off season. So they build this base that they then have a good cardio foundation that they can then apply maybe higher intensities to more anaerobic activities. So we see most of it used in the off season, but if you're a long distance runner, you're definitely going to use that into the pre and into the in season. But intensity would increase again. You're going to go more into the higher intensities, into that more anaerobic threshold, and get that lactate production being produced. So still we'll see the most in the off season. That links perfectly to the periodization, chapter 21. Knowing, and this is just semester project, so you should know this already, but knowing the different lengths of cycles, you've got your macro cycle, your annual, or even maybe up to 4 years if it's Olympic athletes, 4-year cycles. which is a macro, large scale, big picture. Then you can break that down into the mesocycles. Maybe that's a couple months to up to 6 months, where we're having a focus. This is the off season. This is the preparation. This is transition. So a couple months in mesocycles, and then you break those down further into the microcycles, which is either a week, 2 weeks, 3, maybe up to 4 weeks, where you're actually then going, okay, what are we actually doing under this focus? That is maybe the off season. What are we actually doing to achieve that? Is this going to be longer distance runs? Is this going to be more intensity? Are we going into the weight room? Are we going to be more in the field doing skill specific? You've got to be able to put that in on the micro is actually what we are doing, whereas the meso is kind of the theme and the macro is kind of the big picture. I mentioned those in the different seasons there, the preparation, transition, competitive, second transition, just other names for off, pre, in, and post season. What you should see in terms of progression and regression of things within that macro cycle. So in the off season, we'll start there. We have high volume. That's again why the aerobic base is important there. Lots of work being done. And as we transition into preseason, we start to taper on the volume and increase on the intensity. Okay, and so all of those type of changes will occur where intensity increases and duration probably decreases. Okay, we're getting more skill specific and less general strength. Okay, so things are transitioning into sport specific activities and skills. Know the general adaptation syndrome. So this is what happens every time you go in to lift or any workout. Okay, your body didn't know it was going to happen. There's an alarm phase. There's some sort of shock that's happening. Oh my God, I'm being worked. Okay, there's going to have damage. They're going to have a decrease in performance during this alarm phase. Your body's going to then have to recover and repair. This is known as the resistance phase. Your body builds and recovers during this phase. And then you have the exhaustion phase, that if you continue training and don't give a chance for this resistance phase to occur, you'll get to the exhaustion phase. And that's where overtraining happens. You get burnout. You maybe have some more chronic overuse injuries occur. So we got to allow each to happen. And that's general adaptation. Last chapter is 22, rehabilitation and reconditioning. So knowing the stages of repair, or even let's start with the types of injuries. So the stages or grades of injury, first, second, and third, whether it's a muscle strain or a joint sprain. So joint is sprain, muscle is strain. Type 1 is partial tear with strong, still being able to use it, activity, but it is painful. So partial tear, but still able to function just with pain. Second one would be partial tear, but now the strength has been affected. It's weak and there's pain. So weakness and pain with the partial tear is type 2. And grade 3 would be complete tear and you can't use it because it's torn. So 3 different grades, and it's similar both on the strain and the sprain with those grades that we use. Then we go into the stages of repair. Similar to what we saw with the adaptation, we have an inflammation stage that first occurs with the repair and remodeling. So you have inflammation. You've probably all experienced this. If you get a sudden twist an ankle, hurt a muscle, strain a muscle, it gets tight, it's swelling up. That's inflammation. You're trying to decrease the body is trying to decrease any additional movement there because there's an injury that's occurred. This can be a good thing. It can be a negative thing, depending on where it's happening, because is that inflammation going to create further issues? Is that swelling going to disrupt more tissue around it, more joint structure? So sometimes ice and compression is good there. Sometimes it isn't. It just depends on the situation. And is the swelling advantageous or is it not? Okay. Then goes into the fibroplastic repair stage. So this is when we start getting the increased collagen production. This is when you get low organization, but things are being built back together and the inflammation starts to come down. So the structures are strengthening, the inflammation is decreasing. And then you have the remodeling, which is when we reorganize and the body starts aligning these fibers the way they should be, the way they're being pulled with muscle tension, and your strength will increase. So we see that. Things that we should be doing in the types of movements, the open and closed kinetic chain movements. Closed kinetic chain is a lot safer. If you're injured, that's where you want to start before you move to the open chain. Open chain means we have no connection to a supported ground force. So it's a free weight moving. It is has a lot more opportunity to vary its path, and is more stress on the body to control it. Closed kinetic chain is there's a sturdy force, a ground contact that is stabilizing that movement. So a lot of like your machines are going to be more closed loop, but you can have some open kinetic chain movements on machines. Majority of them will be closed chain. Squatting on the lower leg, we look at the legs, is connected to the floor. That is a closed chain. So it's a safe movement. There's not too much freedom of motion. But if we are jumping and therefore there isn't contact, then there would be more open chain, and there's more variation that could occur at the range of motion and joints, and injury could happen. I hope that's helpful. And that's all the chapters and things that we will cover. Same thing for the exam. It's 40 questions, multiple choice. So do your best. When you get done, you can leave. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions. If you want to come by before the exam next week. Good luck studying. That's it.